Welcome to a deep dive
Okay.
into a story that's both familiar and deeply unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
we all know the basic idea, right? The man, the
Uh,
potion, the monstrous
yeah.
transformation.
Of course.
But there's a reason this story continues to fascinate us well beyond those pop culture references.
Right.
It's like Stevenson tapped into some fundamental anxieties of the human
Oh,
experience.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And to really understand Jekyll and Hyde, we need to go beyond those surface level interpretations of good versus evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's about duality,
Yeah. Okay.
but in a much broader sense. I mean,
Yeah.
think about the Victorian society
Okay.
in which the story takes place.
Right.
It was an era obsessed with respectability, with maintaining this facade of social order.
Right.
But beneath that surface, there were all these anxieties bubbling up about science, about morality,
Yeah.
about the very nature of the self.
It's like a pressure cooker waiting to explode.
Exactly.
And Jekyll's transformation becomes this literal embodiment of
Yes.
those anxieties.
Yeah.
We've got a stack of sources here, literary analyses, book reviews,
Yes.
even excerpts from the text itself.
Right.
What I'm really curious about is
Right.
how do these different perspectives help us unlock those deeper layers of meaning?
Well, for starters,
Yeah.
even something as simple as Jekyll's house
Okay.
becomes this incredibly potent symbol.
Okay.
It's got that respectable front, but hidden away is the laboratory, the
Yeah.
site of all these transgressions.
Yeah.
It's almost like a physical manifestation of that split
Yeah.
between public and private selves
Yeah.
that was so characteristic of Victorian society.
I see what you mean.
Right.
It's like that pressure to conform,
Yeah,
to repress anything deemed unacceptable.
absolutely.
Could actually create this breeding ground for darker impulses. And then Jekyll's transformation becomes this terrifying,
Right.
but also kind of liberating
Yeah.
release.
Exactly. And the language Stevenson uses to describe Hyde really reinforces that sense of transgression.
Okay.
Words like deformed, troglodytic,
Mhm.
almost animalistic descriptions that tap into this deep-seated fear
Yeah.
of the primitive self breaking free from the constraints of civilization,
Okay.
you know?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So we've got this societal pressure cooker.
Uh-huh.
Then we have these rich descriptions that seem to almost personify those anxieties,
Right.
but it's a story. Right?
Yes.
So let's talk about the characters.
Okay.
I mean,
Right.
even the names themselves.
Yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde
Mhm.
hint at this idea of hidden depths.
Oh,
Or- yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Jekyll, from the French jeter,
Oh, wow.
suggesting a kind of self-annihilation,
I see.
and Hyde.
Yeah.
So obviously about concealment, about the things we try to keep hidden from the world, and maybe even from ourselves.
Yeah.
It's brilliant how Stevenson sets this up.
It makes me think about Mr. Utterson,
Okay.
the lawyer who's trying to piece together this mystery.
Yeah.
We see the story largely through his eyes.
Right.
And he's such a quintessential Victorian gentleman,
Yes.
rational, reserved,
Yes.
committed to upholding those social norms.
Right.
How does that shape our understanding of what's happening?
Well, one of the sources uses the term unreliable narrator,
Okay.
which I think applies perfectly to Utterson.
Okay.
He's limited by his own worldview,
Right.
unable to fully grasp the depths of Jekyll's transgression.
Right.
And because we're seeing everything through his filter,
Mm-hmm.
we as readers
Right.
also experience that limited perspective.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing
It is.
or maybe deliberately hidden. Which makes me think about that strange detail about Utterson's first encounter with Hyde.
Okay.
He experiences this intense, almost physical revulsion,
Mm-hmm.
but he can't explain why.
Yeah.
It's like Hyde represents something so fundamentally unsettling
Right.
that it goes beyond rational explanation.
And that's where Stevenson's genius really shines through. He taps into these primal fears,
Mm-hmm.
these anxieties that exist just below the surface of our conscious minds.
Okay.
It's not just about a man transforming into a monster.
Yeah.
It's about the monster that might exist within all of us.
It's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
This story might be set in Victorian England,
Right.
but those fears feel incredibly relevant today.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, what are the Hydes lurking in our own modern society?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
how do those societal pressures
Right.
may be different from,
Yeah.
but still reminiscent of the Victorian era,
Mhm.
contribute to the creation of those monsters?
Thank
I mean,
you.
are we ever truly free from that struggle between our public and private selves,
It's a good question.
between the desire for both conformity and transgression?
These are some seriously deep questions.
Yeah.
And it seems like Jekyll and Hyde offers more of a reflection than an answer.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm picking up here is this idea that to really understand the story,
Yeah.
we need to consider those multiple perspectives, those
Right.
hidden anxieties,
Yeah.
and the role of society in shaping individual choices.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's not a simple morality tale.
Right.
It's a complex exploration of human nature,
Mhm.
of the darkness that exists alongside our aspirations for virtue.
Yeah.
And that's why it continues to resonate with us
Yeah.
even today.
This is already blowing my mind.
Oh,
We're
God.
just getting started.
Yeah,
This is why we do these deep dives.
I agree.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion,
Uh-huh.
but instead of tears,
Right.
we get these incredible insights into the human condition.
It's true.
Yeah. Okay, we've been talking about duality and repression, those anxieties simmering beneath the surface of Victorian society. But Jekyll and Hyde isn't just a social commentary, it's also a story about scientific ambition. And that brings us to another literary giant of the time, Frankenstein. I noticed one of the sources drew a parallel between the two.
It's a really interesting comparison. Both stories grapple with the consequences of unchecked scientific ambition. Victor Frankenstein, in his quest to create life, unleashes something monstrous. And Jekyll, with his potion, unleashes the Hyde within himself.
So both characters are essentially playing God, but it's not some accident, right? They're actively choosing to push those boundaries even though they know there are risks. It feels like a very deliberate critique of scientific progress, at least when it's divorced from ethical considerations.
Absolutely. And we have to remember the historical context here. The Victorian era saw incredible advancements in science and medicine, but it also triggered a lot of anxiety. Darwin's theory of evolution was published just a few decades before Jekyll and Hyde, challenging traditional beliefs about the nature of humanity. There was this sense that science was encroaching on sacred territory, potentially unleashing forces we couldn't control.
That's a great point. Jekyll's transformation becomes more than just a personal struggle. It becomes symbolic of this larger societal fear of scientific progress, outpacing our moral understanding. So, okay, we've got the social context, the anxieties, the scientific ambition, but how does Stevenson actually tell the story? It's not just a straightforward narrative, right?
No, and that's one of the things that makes it so compelling. We're given these fragmented perspectives, multiple narrators who each have a piece of the puzzle. It's like those old detective stories where you have to sift through the clues to figure out what really happened.
And each of those narrators has their own limitations. Utterson, as we discussed, is blinded by his Victorian worldview. Enfield witnesses Hyde's brutality, but only catches a glimpse. Even Lanyon, who witnesses the transformation firsthand, is left traumatized and unable to fully comprehend what he's seen.
And this isn't just a clever narrative device, it's a reflection of how we experience the world.
Yeah.
We only ever get partial truths, often filtered through our own biases and preconceptions. Just like the characters in the story, we're left to piece together the fragments and try to make sense of the bigger picture.
That's such a great point. It's like Stevenson is forcing us to confront the limitations of our own understanding. And then there's Jekyll himself finally revealing the truth in his confession. But even that, I'm guessing, isn't completely reliable, is it?
Exactly. Even in his own account, Jekyll is grappling with his choices, trying to rationalize his actions. He's a scientist, after all, seeking to understand and explain the transformation, even as he's horrified by it.
Yeah.
So even that final confession is a blend of truth and self-deception.
So much for easy answers. Okay, this whole idea of multiple perspectives and unreliable narrators is really adding another layer to the story. But I want to go back to something you said earlier about the language Stevenson uses, those visceral descriptions of Hyde. It's not just about the transformation itself, it's about the horror that Hyde evokes in everyone he meets.
Right, and that ties back to those societal anxieties we were talking about. Hyde becomes this embodiment of everything the Victorians feared. The loss of control, the unleashing of those primal instincts they tried so hard to repress. It's almost like a collective nightmare, a vision of what happens when civilization's thin veneer cracks.
Okay, but let's not forget, Jekyll chooses to become Hyde. There's an element of liberation in that transformation, this ability to indulge those darker impulses without consequence, at least initially. Doesn't that complicate the idea of losing control?
That's a great point, and it really gets to the heart of what makes the story so psychologically complex. Yes, Jekyll initially embraces Hyde reveling in the freedom from societal constraints, but as one of the reviewers pointed out, it quickly becomes an addiction. He loses the ability to control the transformations, becoming a slave to his own creation.
That makes me think about those descriptions of Jekyll waking up as Hyde the transformation becoming more and more involuntary.
Yeah.
It's chilling because it suggests that those darker impulses might be stronger than our conscious will lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the opportunity to break free.
Mm.
So we've got this compelling mix of social commentary, psychological horror, and scientific exploration. But I keep coming back to that central question: can we ever truly separate good and evil? Or are those impulses, those different facets of the self, always intertwined?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something that resonates just as strongly today as it did in Victorian England. I mean,
Yeah.
we're still fascinated by stories about split personalities,
Hmm.
about the dark side of human nature.
Think about all the crime dramas, the psychological thrillers, the true crime podcasts that are so popular.
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly trying to understand that darkness, that potential for evil that exists within ourselves and others.
And Jekyll and Hyde goes beyond just acknowledging that darkness.
Mhm.
It suggests that maybe those darker impulses aren't something we can simply excise or repress. Maybe they're part of what makes us human, a necessary counterpoint to our aspirations for virtue.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It is unsettling.
To think that maybe those monstrous possibilities are always lurking beneath the surface, just waiting for the right conditions to emerge.
But it's also a challenge. If we accept that duality as an inherent part of ourselves, then the question becomes, how do we manage it? How do we integrate those different aspects of the self in a way that allows us to live a good, meaningful life?
And that brings us back to those anxieties of the Victorian era, right? That struggle to reconcile scientific progress with moral responsibility, individual freedom, with societal expectations. It's like they were grappling with these fundamental questions that we're still trying to answer today.
Exactly. And maybe there aren't any easy answers. But Jekyll and Hyde at least forces us to confront those questions, to look into the mirror and acknowledge those shadowy parts of ourselves.
You know, it's funny, when we started this deep dive, I thought I knew Jekyll and Hyde. The peep culture references the basic plot points. But exploring these different sources, considering the historical context, those deeper layers of meaning, it's completely changed my perspective.
That's the power of a truly great work of literature, isn't it?
Yeah,
It continues to reveal new insights, new layers of meaning each time we engage with it.
absolutely. And Jekyll and Hyde isn't just some dusty Victorian novel. It's a story that still speaks to us, challenges us, and maybe even helps us understand ourselves a little bit better.
And on that note, I want to leave you with one final thought. If you could, like, Jekyll separate out the different aspects of your personality, would you? And if so, what would you do with those separated selves? It's a question that might make you a little uncomfortable, but hopefully it'll spark some reflection on your own journey of self-discovery.
That's a great one. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the complex world of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Until next time, happy reading, and remember, keep those darker impulses in check, or at least try to.